On page 20 of the Marmakomis, at the very bottom of the Amud of the Gemara. The Gemara discusses the Mishnah, which is on page 19 of the booklet. Someone drinks water in order to quench his thirst, the Brachos shakoil, and then the Mishnah brings Reparfin Omer Boirein Fashes Rabbis V'Chesroinon, which we'll see based on that refers to Brachos Rishona or also refers to Brachos Achrein. So continuing with the Gemara on the bottom of page 20, Zot the Gemara Sheitzamayim Litzmoi La Fuke Mai. What is the Mishnah coming to exclude? Which purpose of Shtias Mayim is the Gemara coming to exclude, which wouldn't be Mechai B'Shakoil? Amar Bidi Bar Ovin La Fuke Leman De Chanakte Oimtza. Someone who is drinking water because he is struggling to swallow his mouth. Chanakte Oimtza. We have a basic shailo, what the Gemara's teretz is of Lafuki man de chanakte oimtza. There's two basic ways to understand the Gemara, as is set out by the Bir Halacha in Siman Reish Daled Sif Zayin. If you look in the Marmakomis book, Siman Reish Daled Sif Zayin is on page 258, page 259. What we focused on the Bir Halacha on page 259, where the Bir Halacha sets out, and we'll see the Lashon of Bir Halacha in a moment, just to explain the background briefly of the Bir Halacha's Shaila. There are two basic ways to understand the Gemara's teretz. One way to understand the Gemara's teretz is the Gemara is being mechadish, a chiddush specific to Chanakte Oimtza. The Hainu, the basic klal is that Brachos on Ischayev for Hana, and we already had on Daf Lamed Vav, and this is referenced by the places in our Sugyas, we'll see that there is a discussion b'negea to someone who's being shoysa something, for example, a refuah, where the purpose is not the Hanoas Achila, the purpose is the Toyelas of ingesting. So too, we have a Sugya, which we'll see Beis Hashem in a further limud, of someone who eats something, he's forced to eat something with the intention that the achila is not ano. So we understand that there's some point at which we are mechalik between where the benefit of the achila is called hana, and the benefit of the achila no longer qualifies as being defined as hana, and therefore isn't mechayev b'birchas hanen. So we could possibly understand the Gemara that the chiddush of the Gemara is a narrow chiddush in terms of how to understand whether or not Chanakte Oimtza qualifies as Hana. We could say that since Chanakte Oimtza is only in order to be able, so that he should be able to be Beileah, Meloi Lugmov, in the Lashon of the Rishonim, so therefore that's not considered Hana from the Mayim, simply a way of being able to relieve the pressure, as we'll see in the Bir Halacha. And Memela, Chanakte Oimtza is not called an end. That would therefore mean that when one is Shoyse Mayim, in order to be able to be Mavarach HaShahakol, one wouldn't necessarily need that specifically one was Shoyse Mayim Litzmoi. The Gemara was merely saying that Hanakte Oimtza is not Hana. But any other oifen of Shtias Mayim, even if it wouldn't be necessarily Litzmoi, would be still Chayev a Brach of Shahakol. Or we could learn the Gemara entirely L'idach Gisa and say that La'olam, the chiddush of the Mishnah is hashoysemayim litzmoi, that one needs to be shoysemayim to be mechai b'shakol only litzmoi. And any instance in which mayim is not being drunk litzmoi wouldn't be mechai of the bracha. Why then does the Gemara go on to say lafuke chanakte oimtza? Why doesn't the Gemara go on to say simply lafuke, a case where mayim is not being drunk litzmoi? Why does the Gemara have to discuss a case so specific as Chanakte Oimtza? So with that, we'll see the Bir Halacha, that the Bir Halacha will bring a yishub to this from the Ra'ah and the Chidushim. Why, if we understand that one requires Shoyse Mayim Litzmoi Dafka, why the Gemara understands the Mishnah is only coming to exclude Chanakte Oimtza. So to summarize, we have two ways to understand the Gemara. Is the Gemara being mechadish something about Chanakte Oimtza, that Chanakte Oimtza is not Hana? But any other oifen of Shtias Mayim would be like any other mashka that would be Mechai B'Shahakol or L'idach Gisa. The only oifen that one is Chai B'Shahakol by Mayim is Shoyse Litzmoi. And Chanakte Oimsa is just one instance of mayim that's not drunk l'tzmoi, in which case we have to understand why the Gemara simply didn't state la'fuke sheis mayim, not in the case of l'tzmoi. So to see briefly the Bir Halacha, the Bir Halacha begins by quoting the lashon of the Gemara, and then he says, "Upirish b'chidushe hara'ah." Al masha omar ba'Gemara la'fuke mai pirush demaya loy shosi inshei elo l'tzmoi. Zok the Bir Halacha. The reason why the Gemara only mentions that the mission is coming to exclude Chanakte Oimsa is because ordinarily there isn't a case in which Mayim is drunk lahano except L'tzmoi. In other words, the usual two uses of Mayim are either L'tzmoi or Chanakte Oimsa. So the Gemara therefore brings one or the other. And this is a very important term that the Ra'ah uses, which Be'ezer Hashem will come back to discuss, and this will be one of the Yesodis that this limud will be based on, is that the Ra'ah says, because there is no oifen of being nene from mayim without that. If he knows that he's not drinking it, he's drinking it for a different reason. Zok the Bir Halacha that the Ra'ah explains that the reason why the Gemara contrasts Shoysim Mayim L'tzmoi and Chanakte Oimsa is because the usual use of Mayim is L'tzmoi, so that's its usual Hana. But Zok the Bir Halacha, if a person would be Shoysim Mayim, Shaloi L'tzmoi, but in another form of Hana, that also wouldn't be Mechayev Shahako, as the Bir Halacha will illustrate later. Now, what's the case? So the case is in the second Bir Halacha on Chanakte Oimsa, Zot the Bir Halacha. Bottom left. It's not Chanakte Oimsa, but a person has heartburn, the food hasn't fully gone down. Zot the Mishnah Berurah, it's pressing on his chest. Zok the Bir Halacha, the klal is like this. Shoyse mayim litzmo'oi means shoyse mayim lahano. The normal case of shoyse mayim lahano is tzimo'im. If a person would be shoyse mayim for a different form of hana, as we'll see later on, the Bir Halacha says, for example, lishrois hamozain b'meil, that he should feel satisfied, that would be called nene, and that would be equivalent of shoyse mayim litzmo'im. However, Zok the Bir Halacha, when the Gemara says Chanakte Oimsa, that's not the only case which we're excluding. We're excluding any case where there isn't direct Hana from the man. Zok the Ra'ah, so why doesn't the Gemara say that? Instead of going to Chanakte Oimsa, the Gemara should say any case where he's not Sheis Mayim Lahana. Zok the Bir Halacha, because the usual case of being Sheis Mayim Lahana is for Tzimoim. So, in short, if we summarize what's Mavur Mitech the Bir Halacha, there are three possible instances of Shtiyas Mayim. One is for Tzimoim, second is for Hana, and the third is not for Hana. Zog the Bir Halacha, Shoyse Mayim Tzimoim is the usual use. There are other cases which you can be nene, which the Bir Halacha will discuss at the end. For example, Lishrois Mayim B'Neil. That also is the equivalent of Shoyse Mayim Tzimoim. Then we have a third category where the person is not being Shoyse Lahana B'Chlal, that's included in Chanakte Oimsa. So Zot the Bir Halacha, Chanakte Oimsa is Lav Dafka, and Hu Adin Shoyse Mayim Tzimoim is Lav Dafka. Chanakte Oimsa just means any case where you're not being Nene, and Shoyse Mayim Tzimoim means any case where you are being Nene. So if we would summarize the klal of the Bir Halacha, the Bir Halacha has said that there are various forms in which one can be Nene from Mayim. As long as one is nene, it's included in Shmei Samayim Tzmoi. As long as one is not nene, it's included in Chanakte Oimsa. If you look in the lashon of the Mishnah Berurah, in the top of the Mishnah Berurah, just above the Bir Halacha, Zok the Mishnah Berurah in Sivkot Mem Litzmoi near the lav dafka Litzmoi mamish. Elo bestomo kol shahachich nene mehamayim. As long as the heich is being nene, mistomu hu tzorech ktsas v'tzorech lebracha. So the Mishnah Berurah is clearly being maitik, and I'm not certain which achra in this lashon comes from of kol she'achich nene fa'amayim is stomach hashasi l'tzimoim, but the Mishnah Berurah is l'shitosoi that the klal of l'tzimoi is an instance of the cheich being nene. This is the klal that's mavur mitich the Bir Halacha and the Mishnah Berurah. Therefore, if we just for a moment go to the maskonas advarim in the Bir Halacha, the Bir Halacha says that we find a case which we mentioned before briefly, where he says in the last 4 lines of the Bir Halacha, left hand side, zok there, v'ayin ma shekosavnu b'Mishnah Berurah, di'im ha'cheich nene mehashtia, as long as the cheich is being nene, the palate is being nene, b'chlal litzima'oihu, v'da'oid, the mashal medivra poiskim have a raya. At the end, if a person after he ate is drinking in order to feel settled, that's also included in the din of shoysel itzmoy. Where's the raya? Zok the Bir Halacha in the parentheses, it's in the Chidushi or Rashba in Brachos Tafnim Aleph the Shari Shem. What's this? Well, recall we learned this Rashba together in the Sugya of Dvarim Aboim B'Seich HaSuda, where the Rashba brings a machlokes or rishonim if mashkim b'soich hasuda are considered tofel to the suda. B'soich hadvarim, the Rashba brings a ravid that mashkim na aboim lishrois hamaychol are certainly called dvarim haboim b'soich hasuda and are potter with the bracha of the pas. Frek the Bir Halacha, this is what he means in this parentheses with this maramot going. How can the Raiva discuss if mayim that comes in the Suda, Lishreis, the Meichel Shebemeov, is or isn't included in the bracha? There's
no bracha.
So there's no bracha, it's mayim. Elomai Zok the Bir Halacha, Muchach from the Rashba, that mayim that Bol Lishreis HaMeichel Shebemeov is also called being Nene. Elomai, because it comes, Machmas the Meichel, it comes to Suda, the Meil, it's Niftan the bracha. So the Bir Halacha, the nafkamina would be that if after the Sudan someone already made Birchas Hamazon, and so the mayim would not be included in the bracha of the Suda, and then he drank mayim, lishrois mayim shebemeyo, would he be mechuyev bracha? Zot the Bir Halacha, he'd be mechuyev bracha. That's also be called a net. So again, we have both a klal and a prat. We have a klal of the Mishnah Berurah of the Bir Halacha that when it says sheis mayim litzmoi, that means any instance of nene. Cheich nene. Even lishrois hamaychel zot the Mishnah Berurah is considered cheich nene. Mashenkin the hoired hamaychel, that is not nene, and therefore is b'chlal the din of chanakte oimtza. So according to the Bir Halacha, the suffix that we began with is the chiddush of the Gemara a chiddush that chanakte oimtza is not nene, or is the chiddush of the Gemara that we need dafka shoysemayim litzmoi? Zot the Bir Halacha both allow dafka. Chanakte oimtza means any instance of a shtia that's not for the purpose of hanoas acheich, and shoysemayim litzmoi is any instance of hanoas acheich, which includes even lishos hamayim b'meil. This is the maskona of how the Bir Halacha is mefarish the Gemara, and the Bir Halacha is nismach on the Ra'ah. That when the Ra'ah asks why the Gemara had to use the case of chanakte oimtza as the case the Mishnah is coming to exclude, why didn't it just say any case of not being nene? The answer is because the usual presentation of mayim is to be nene from tzimoi, but einu chanami. Zot the Bir Halacha, the Gemara is lav dafka. This is mavur in the Rishonim. The Bir Halacha goes on to be medayik this from the lashon of the Rambam, and then he goes on to bring 2 achreinim, that there is Elio and the Teisah Shabbos, that both of them say mefurish that the Gemara doesn't just mean to exclude chanakte oimtza. The Gemara means dafka a case of shoysemayim litzmoi, which the Bir Halacha understands means as long as the cheich is nen. Azay is mavur in Bir Halacha, and that's what the Mishnah Berurah is matik l'dinam. And we find in Imri Noyam, which is a likut of chidushim of the Goyim, that in Imri Noyam state a dover pele. In Imri Noyam state, the Talmidim write this b'shem the Gra. It's on the top right of today's Maram Amos. So zot the Bir Gra azay. Well, there's 2 dinim in this Imri Noyam. We'll begin with the second one. And it begins 5 lines down in the Imri Noyam, a line beginning with the word v'chein.
Tea without sugar.
V'chein im shoyse tei beloy zucker. if someone is drinking tea without sugar, ein loy levarech afilu bracha rishona im shoyse shaloy letzimo. Kavanosoi kishoyse rak kedei shaloy lotzes aliba rekonis ve'ein loy tzame ve'ein loy hano beloy ve'ein loy hano beloy tzokar. So sagt the Imrei Noyam a chiddush gadol. He's saying, what happens if a person drinks tea without sugar? And why is he drinking the tea without sugar? Because he's before davening. So he doesn't want to be yotzei aliba rekono. He wants to be makbid not to drink a tea with the sugar before davening. So Memele, he drinks the tea. Zok the Imrei Noyam, in that case, the tea has a din of mayim. And therefore it has a tanai that has to be litzmoi. And since he has to be nene, the benefit of shalotses aliba rekono, that in some way there's something in the stomach, he's not on an empty stomach, that's not considered shoysemayim lahana osoi, and therefore he does not make a bracha rishay. As they zok the guy. Shar mashkim afilim einu shoyse el refuah tzarich levarich sheyesh loy hanoah mehem, because there is some hanoah in the taste. Now,
and I assume it's the coffee too. So Lamais, according to this, tea and coffee before davening, without sugar, no bracha.
The chayyot would be without a bracha. Yeah, it would be without a bracha.
Chiddush la'alacha.
Chiddush la'alacha. Now, what's the mechuvan of the goyin? What's the goyin coming to be mechadish? So the goyin is coming to be mechadish that even though there's a tam of tea in the mayim, and so l'chayr we would say al tam, it should now be considered tea and not water. And the olam will remember that in the sugya of shlokos we had a tshuvas ponim mi'iris, that the tshuvas ponim mi'iris discussed why tea doesn't have the bracha of b'er priyot. It should be shlokos. How does one make a cup of tea? One put tea to the tea leaves give off of their tam into the water. So it's shlokos, it's maya the shalke of tea.
Shalke of tea.
It's maya the shalke of tea. So in the sugya of shlokos, we discussed at Shuvas Panim Eiros why the bracha of tea should be a shahakoil. So we discussed, according to the shita of the Rosh, it doesn't have the actual michui guf. It's not the significant tam. It's not dissolved. It's just tam. We had that the Rosh had a suffix if we say the din of shlokos only by Yerokos or by Paris. We had a tziruf of various stodim that the Panim Eiros discussed why the bracha of tea should be a bracha of shakal. The goyin is mavur that tea is b'chal not daima to shlokos at all. It's not. It remains mayim. Zok the goyin, if a person is drinking mayim, just not because the cheich is nene, because it simply benefits him that it's considered that he's not yotzal liberekana, zok the goyin, that's doime to shar mashkim, which are shoysel l'refuah. Now, why by shar mashkim, if you're shoysel l'refuah, do we make a bracha? Because the cheich is nene, there's pleasant taste. But tea, which is bitter without the sugar, doesn't have pleasant taste. And therefore, zok the goyin, being shoyse tei aliba reikona, monoshoch doesn't have a bracha. In terms of what its definition is, it's mayim. Mayim, therefore, is only b'mokum, that one's nene. Aliba reikona is like refuah, it's just for the health benefit of not being aliba reikona. That we say by Sharam Ashkim that shtir l'refuah is only because it has tam. But tea, bitter tea, which doesn't have a pleasant taste, because ordinarily you'd mix sugar in it, would then not be mechayiv a bracha of shaka. As is what the going. Im sheisa table zucker, eloy levarach afilu bracha rishona im sheisa shaloi litzmoi. And the Talmidei Agra explained because he's only doing it lishtas aliba reikana, he's not thirsty. But eloy hano. So mitzad, the refuah benefit, the health benefit of not having a liber reikana, zot the goyim, that by shar mashkim you only make a bracha because Yesh lo hano mehem, but here there's no hano. Azay zot b'day. Tea with lemon, which has a pleasant taste and offsets the bitterness. Avada would have it would. Even if you would be aliba rikana, the cheich would be nene, and therefore you'd be mavach.
Someone's from.
Einochanami. Yeah, einochanami. Yes, correct. And then he has anos achich. I'm assuming we wouldn't say batla daita.
You're asking the flavored tea bags, or you put plum in the thing? The flavored tea bags is a shiloh.
Likes plain tea.
The flavored tea bags is interesting question.
Yes, correct. In those cases, einochanami. Why is he not drinking? Well, plain hot water is very difficult to drink. Plain hot water is very difficult to drink. There is actually, now that you mentioned it, there is an Avnei Nezer, brings us back to a year ago, to Hilchos Shabbos. An Avnei Nezer which we discussed in Hilchos Shabbos, where the Avnei Nezer says that by Mayim Shenitstananu, or remember the Chiddush, there is Bishul Achar Bishul, because the Ikar Hano from Mayim is the Chaim. The Toich Devar of the Avnei Nezer says that hot water doesn't have a din of Shaisel Itzmoy, because the Chaim itself is the Hano. It's only Mayim Korim which the whole Gemara applies to. That's Avnei Nezer. That's always Hano. So Lefi the Avnei Nezer ein nechanami, even plain hot water, the benefit of the warmth itself is considered Hano. That's if they said that's not what the Gemara is talking about. But most Achreinim are not masked this Chiddush of Avnei Nezer, and the tea is only a way to just make the mayim palatable. But it's not a Hano from the Gufa mayim. Stating going a Chiddush that the goyin has been mitzamtzim that the biur halacha, that avada one has to be nene from the mayim. Alibere kono is not considered nene. That's considered like refuah, and therefore it's only where the cheich is toyim, where the cheich is toyim. The chiddush nifla of the gra is that even though there's me'urev, a tam ki ikar of tea, the mayim retains its shem mayim, and we don't say that now the mayim should be called tea so that it's natural like sham ashki. That we don't say. Azoy is mavur in the gra. Either gisa, the Eshel Avrom in Eshel Avrom Tinyana, and the shaila is very relevant to the din of making a shakoil on salsa.
This is the b'chucha, yeah.
This is the b'chucha, yeah. In Eshel Avrom Tinyana, this is printed as a separate sefer, not in the back of the Shulchan Aruch.
Oh, that's we couldn't find it. Okay.
So the Eshel Avrom says the following. He says, "Ma'im shaloylet smoy in tzarich bracha lefanov, ula HaRav doesn't need a bracha either lefanov or HaRav." Now, imromi beit tzvio ma'at. What happens if he puts in a little bit of a tincture, some type of mashke that he puts in?
What, a coloring?
To coloring. He puts in, yeah. Tzvio means by the old European Iyunim, when you put in a little bit of coffee or a little bit of tea, that didn't make it a strong drink, but just added a drop of flavor to the water. That's what they called kolir in the vas. Yeah, kolir in the vas. Yeah, tzvia ma'at. It was dissolved something small, maybe a drop of fruit juice, drop of lemon juice. It was put into the mayim. So when zot the Eshel Avrom, is it considered mayim, and when is it considered shamash? So the Eshel Avrom gives us a klal, and he says, Depends what it's called. Im alidei hama'at kol kach eino begeder maim rak begeder mashke shaykh bracha achroina shal shir shal mashke mamish. V'kol shekein im hergish bekach tam mashu l'shvach oireach mutam. So he says depends what it's called. If you call it, to use the example of the gra, if you would call it tea, it would have the din of shamash. If you would call it still water, then it would be considered water. Zakter kol shekain, all the more so it would be considered imhergish tam mashu l'shvach, if it would add tam l'shvach, or reach mutam, or it would add some type of gishmak in reach. That's the klal of the b'chucha. Kahainu, the b'chucha is being chaylik on the goyin. And you would say that whenever you dissolve something else in mayim, if it changes in shem, it changes in tam, or it changes in reach, that's in din mayim, and the din would be that you'd make the bracha like you'd make the bracha on whatever the tam would be. Then he discusses, even if there be bittul b'shishim, do we actually need, how significant do we need? So he says, it's not considered to be defined as mayim. He says, what should be the difference between this and shlokos? In shlokos, do we find the difference how intense the tam should be? If it has tam and it's considered mayim shalke. Mikol mokoim al yedei sheyesh tam mevorech lafonov ula'acharav gam kishe'einoit sama. So the HaRav is chaylik on the gra, and he says as soon as you add any tam, then l'chayra, that tam of adding tam or reach should l'chayra change it to maya d'shalke. Should change it to maya d'shalke. And l'chura in svara, the eshel Avram is mistaber. HaRav the HaRav said that even if we're shoyse mayim lishoyse hamaychel shebemeov, it doesn't have to be dafke l'tzmoi. It's as long as it's considered samnene. So l'chura, as soon as we add something to the mayim that in any way benefits the mayim or changes it to give a hanor besides the ordinary hanor of mayim, which is shoyse l'tzmoi, should make it like sha'am ashkin. Even if we don't accept the full analogy of the buchacha, that as soon as we add flavor, it becomes entirely like maya d'shalke, or it becomes like tam ke'ikr. But l'may nafkemina, soif kol soif, the Gemara's l'tzmoi is labdafka, the Biur Halacha proved on the Rishonim. It means as long as there's some form of hanor. So clearly, if the tam is being added to the mayim for some benefit, that means there's some toyelis from the mayim. So even without saying it has tam, and even without saying we need dafka shir of less than shishim, soif kol soif will be nene from the mayim in some way. So my poskas that the Gra says, if you add tea to water, you have to be nene entirely, and any other benefit that you get from adding the tea to the mayim doesn't change what it is. First of all, the Eshel Avram says it should be like maya d'shalke, and secondly, soif kol soif, you're being nene. But men nechluku, the Rabbi Seinu Achronim, in a case where something is added to water, how to consider it? Do we consider that mayim or not? And an afgemina is, and I think this is a mavucha rabba nachronim, without a clear hachra. I once asked my Rebbe Shmuel Felder about this ladina. There wasn't a clear hachra on the shaila. How do we consider seltzer? There's a
which seltzer? There's 10 types of different seltzer.
We're saying plain and unflavored. I don't know if this is any more from your time, but when we were children, there was a brilliant storyteller. He's already ba'alma b'kshayt. His name was Rav Shmuel Kunda, and he made children's tapes. And there's a children's tape in which seltzer is described humorously as water with some explosions in it. All my children know the tape. I know the tape.
Explosion?
Some water with explosions in it. So how do? Okay. So the shaila then is, how do we consider seltzer? Is that in the lashon of the buchacha, something has signa in mayim, or as long as it's changed, even that it adds reach, the buchacha says, it should change that it's not merely mayim. Dahainu, in the understanding of the buchacha of mayim is something whose entire hanor is just something like sheisel etzmoi. But once we broaden it to other efanim of hanor,
which applies to today's, was pointed out earlier, water with that little smell. It's
yes, the buchacha is more that should add hanor, and the bracha should be like the bracha should be mechay, the bracha of shakol. We're not going to look at seltzer as simply mine. Yes, lodun in this nice. But what we'll try and do is to understand, based on this gra and a number of other maramakemis in the Sugya, to come to a very basic understanding in what the maskonas hagimora is, and perhaps see if all Rabbi Seinu Achronim are besignon echad with the Biur Halacha, that the hagdar of mayim is that as long as there's hanor, that's considered b'chal mayim. What does find shtias mayim and what doesn't?
Soda water is much more expensive than water.
Yes, it has a chashivus itself. Yeah. It's not signon mayim. So this shaila we can be poshet from, or like upon him, this tzad in the Gemara, which we want to suggest as an additional mahalach in the Gemara, and through that gain an understanding of this basic nidin of the Gra and the Eshel Avram, is from a Pelodic Machloikes between the Birkei Yosef and the Ma'amar Mordechai. The Birkei Yosef is Mechadesh. It's top left of the Maramikayos.
There's paces right there. Should be sheet.
That someone
Over there.
Made the following mistake when it came to Shtiyas Mayim. Zeh hoyo ma'aseh be'echod shebirech boyer nefashos rabbis betchila v'shosa mayim v'achar shtiyosai birech shehakoil v'yesh listapik im yotza. Now, there are two parts to this shayla. One is the fact that he made boyer nefashos rabbis before. Was he yotzei bracha rishayna? Now, once he finished drinking, obviously that shayla is not negay anymore. You can't make a bracha rishayna afterwards. So that's one shayla. If a person made boyer nefashos rabbis before shtiyas mayim, does he then have to make a shahakol in order to be able to be sheis mayim mitchila? A second shayla is, if he made shahakol afterwards, does he now have to make a boyer nefashos rabbis instead of the shahakol? Kipshutoi, if we would hear this shayla, we wouldn't begin to understand what the shayla is. HaRav, the maskonas haGemara is huk chazi maya amadabar. The halacha is like Tanakam in the Mishnah, that the bracha on mayim is shakol niya b'dvar. That's a losh in the Mishnah. Sheis mayim tzmoi Tanakam v'rav shakol niya b'dvar. There's no sofik, yeah. Hilchos amay omalei huk chazi maya amadabar. And who adin, that one should be able to be yotzei with a bracha la'achra, one should be able to be yotzei shahakoil. Where did shahakol become a substitute for burn nefashos? What are the studying? Monoshach. The first shayla, if he made burn nefashos koydem, is keneged dina de gemara. And where's the havamina that to be able to make a shahakol afterwards should be for mokum burn nefashos? What's v'chal b'tzah? So if you look further in the Birkei Yosef, Birkei Yosef makes a fascinating analogy. He says this is doime to a shayla in the earlier achronim. If someone switches the bracha shalafonav of Birchas HaTorah, and one has an aliyah with the bracha la'achrav, one starts off, instead of saying Asher Bach Rabbanim v'kol ha'amim, the bracha he makes before Kriyas HaTorah was Asher Nosal Lanu Teras Emes. So there, the Bialocha brings, the Birkei Yosef brings that in Siman Samach, in Siman Kuf Samach, there's a discussion, but in the El Yorabah, benogeya to a psak of the Be'er Sheva, the Baal Bar Be'er Sheva, if birich shniya barishoyna, if you should be, first of all, if you were yotzei the bracha shalafanov, and should you be mevarach afterwards the bracha shalachrov. The Mishnah Berurah passes that one does that. If someone lefanov makes by mistake the bracha shalachrov, that's that you remain with, and afterwards he makes the bracha.
In other words, he said HaRav first, that's okay.
Correct, and then so too he draws another analogy, which Shlomo is pointing out, to the din in Siman Samach, which is a din that's discussed by the Achronim in Hilchos Krishma, that if you are makdim avorabo to yotzer or, then the person is yotzer yidei chivas bracha. Say the brachos is not me'akev. The ikar HaRichos of the Birkei Yosef is to discuss back and forth what the halacha is if someone reverses the order of Birchas HaTorah. So he says, end of second paragraph, Hu adin ledidin shalonu, ta halacha revachas levarach sha'akol b'tchila bar nefashos lebasoif. Since you made the wrong bracha first, you make the wrong bracha afterwards, the seder of the brachas is not me'akev. That's the first nakuda. Now the shaila is, should you lichatchila make a bar nefashos rabbis afterwards instead of the shahakoil? So that the Birkei Yosef is marich, and he says in Svara, choda at the end, 5 lines before the end, choda the kvar bircha betchila, you already made a bar nefashos. Besu given the ikar meroid lavi mevarche amaya basoif, the Gemara on Daf Memdaldim and Beis, that there was some around that never made the bracha, therefore lo yivarech oid bar nefashos rabbis. And again, we can add the svara that by Birchas HaTorah we see that if you change the order, you make the bracha shalafonea, you make the bracha la'achreya. Kipshuta, when we see this Birkei Yosef, it's dvarim mavhil, and the nekuda is pointed out by the Mama Mordechai, and he says, are we going to say that by everything that needs a shahakal lefonim and a burn nefashos afterwards, if you reverse the order, then you're yaitse? Someone eats basa, eats beitzim, all the examples. Yeah, cases of the Gemara before. And he makes a burn nefashos the first. He's going to be yaitse bracha rishayna, and he's going to be yaitse bracha achrayna afterwards. So not. That's pasha. So he says, I can't understand what the tzad should the chalal be that you should be able to be yaitse with the mahapach the More than that, the whole analogy of the Birkei Yosef, Mama Mordechai says, is not understandable. In a case of Birchas HaTorah, there's a say there. Torah is mechayev bracha lefonav, it's mechayev bracha la'achar. Chazal masakin, this bracha should be made before, this bracha should be made afterwards. There's something called Seder Brachos. In the case of Birchas Hanenin, it wasn't one takana that Chazal masakin that achila means a bracha lefonav and a bracha la'achar. There's one din of osel lahanas ba'ilam hazeh b'loy bracha, which is mechayev bracha la'achar, and then there's another din that nishochal has to be mevarach on the hano. There's no connection between bracha lefonav and bracha la'achar. There's one mechayev of bracha lefonav and one mechayev of bracha la'achar.
No.
Where's the havamina b'chal that we can switch them?
Not holistic.
It's not mavur b'chal, the comparison of the Birkei Yosef. Now, if we have
The Gemara makes a kavachaymer, a kolshke. Maybe that links the two together. No,
maybe?
the Gemara says lefan la'achra lefan like kolshke.
That's mitzad the mechayev of the hano, but it's two different hanois. One is the hano that we will be oichel, and one is the hano that we already have. They're not connected. There's not a seder that achila is mechayev a bracha lefonav and bracha la'achar. They're not interconnected. Birchas HaTorah, like Birchas Krishma, is mechayev a seder brachos. So therefore, if we change the seder brachos, there's no seder brachos in Birchas Hanenin. This is nichlal in the HaRichos of the Mama Mordechai, copied on the bottom of the first page on the left and copied on the right, and Be'ez Hashem, if we have a chance, we'll come back and we'll see that some of the lashonis of the Mama Mordechai inside of time allows. But we have this chiddush pele of the Birkei Yosef, which the Mama Mordechai certainly, the Birkei Yosef would only have ever said it by Mayim. And the Mama Mordechai is Matmiel. What's the beer in this? It's very fascinating to see that in the Sefer Machzik Bracha of the Chidah, someone wrote to the Chidah that he saw in a Sefer Chodosh, that he's chaylik on what he writes in Birkei Yosef B'toikef, and the Machzik Bracha is chaylik B'toikef back on the Mama Mordechai. And in the later Maduras of the Mama Mordechai Nashmatas, there's a very long arichas that the Mama Mordechai responds to the Chidah. The argument is the machlokes.
They actually corresponded.
Yeah, they actually corresponded. Yeah, it's a machlokes b'toike. Tremendous arichas in daily akronim on this shayla. And b'toich hadvarim, the ikar noise that they argue with almost seems to be a side point in the Gemara. The Hainu. Just mentioned this derech hagam. The Birkei Yosef says that my ikar chiddush that you could be yotze with the bar nefashos rabbis before is unique to Mayim, because b'di eved we could be so mechon parfum. Who says in the Mishnah, why? Because the Gemara was only machriya not like him, atpuk chazi amadebar. So we see that the Gemara in Svara didn't have a hachro to paskin absolutely like the Tanakam of Shakoil, or Yochid v'rabim alocha kirabim, puk chazi amadebar. So they have a fascinating correspondence. If puk chazi amadebar is a psak, or psuk chazi amadebar is just the way we should firzah, the way we should be noyeg lemaisa. But it's not an absolute psak, and therefore b'di eved amadebar and the b'kiyusam ha'atzuma, the cholik al merchave hashas, how to understand what the hachro of puk chazimai amadebar is, not directly negayat harinian.
No, but it's a shas-wide issue.
In klali hashas, ayin sham, and the Mara Mordechai has a hashmata, but arichas to be boina and soisar on the shayla. Fascinating noising. Now that is all benegea to the first shayla of can you be yotze b'di eved the bracha shalafonea with bar nefashos rabbis. But still we have the second chiddush of the chidah that bracha shala'achrov you can make a shahakol. Now that's nothing. That's not to do with the Gemara put chazina ayam with the back. That's a chiddush otzum of the chidah, that there's something called Seder Brachos by Mayim, which is going to be the focus of our limud. Let's put aside the chidah and show another fascinating chiddush that we see in our sugya. This time we took from Rishain. But the Ma'amar Mordechai b'toich dvarov counters the chidah's argument that where you made a ber nefashos rabbis first, you should have to make a shahakal afterwards, because how can you say the same bracha ber nefashos rabbis twice? Zok the Ma'amar Mordechai, I found a furish in the Rishonim that you do that. Where? Zok the Ma'amar Mordechai, Reb Tarfon's shita is that you make a bracha lefon of ber nefashos. What does Reb Tarfon hold about bracha la'achra? So if we look on the Maran Mokem's book on page 21, Tosfos says that according to Reb Tarfon, you do not make a bracha of ber nefashos rabbis afterwards. You do not make the bracha. The Rashba, on the other hand, says that according to Reb Tarfon, you make the bracha of ber nefashos rabbis twice. If you look on the second page of the Maran Mokem's bottom left, there's 4 paragraphs of Ma'amar Mordechai. The last paragraph of Ma'amar Mordechai, which has a beis in parentheses next to it, a beis with a single bracket. We go just a little lower. Thank you. Just a touch lower. There, in the last piece of Ma'amar Mordechai. Zokte umotsosi lo Rashba b'chidushav shekosav l'das Reb Tarfon d'mevorach alamayim ber nefashos rabbis b'tchila shaper yesh loimer d'gam la'achreihem mevorach ber nefashos rabbis. Zeh siyua zok the Mordechai l'dvareinu. That if by mistake you made a ber nefashos rabbis first, even if we'll agree with the chidah that we could be soymech under Tarfon b'di eved, afterwards you'll make a ber nefashos rabbis again. Why? Because if you're a Tarfon, that's what you do. Azay zokt the Ma'amar Mordechai. So he says that this is mefurish in the Rashba that one should make a ber nefashos rabbis afterwards. It's a rayat sum. The Chidah tries to be madche, and he says it's only a tzad that the Rashba said. The Rashba doesn't say clearly you have to. Shlomo Zalman asks in his ksavim on Ketzim Mevarchim, he says in Svara the Chidah is right. He says tzarachin lomo yichbal beis palmim oisa shvach. What would be the logic for a Tarfon to hold that both lefonav and la'achrav you should make the same bracha twice? Why? What would be the reason to make the same bracha ber nefashos twice? You should repeat the same shvach. What's the reason? If you made a shvach on this mayim of ber nefashos rabbis, why are you repeating the same shvach twice? So perhaps to first explain the Shitas HaRashba, and we take that to come to the Chidah. And it's important to mention that we're not just trying to be miyasha the svar of the Chidah. The Chidah later in Shurei Bracha brings that there are mami panel already is mistapik. In this case, of ber nefashos first and shakal afterwards, what the din is. There's already kadmoinim that are Isaac in this shaila well before the Chidah and the Ma'amar Mordechai. So we'll try and understand this suffix of Rabbi Seinu Achronim, and then we'll try and understand the basis of the nidin of the Gra and the Eshel Avrom, but to get to Mayim that has something mixed in, how we look at that din. So we'll suggest the following hesber in the Gemara, based on the Rishonim. The Gemara's maskana was, as we saw, that one has to be shoysemayim litzmoi. The Biur Halacha understood that because the Rishonim say that lishrois meichel shebemeov is also considered shoysemayim litzmoi, the Rashba proved that from the Rishonim discussing whether or not if one drinks mayim in the middle of a suda, if one's mechuyev to make a bracha rishona, or it's included in the bracha of the pas. And the Rishonim discuss a case when one was being shoyse in the suda lishrois mayim. Zot the Biur Halacha we see litzmoi is lav dafka. It means any oifen of hano, as long as it's not literally to get the food down, which is equivalent of chanakte oimsa. So therefore, as we noted, the Biur Halacha and Mishnah Berurah consistently use the lashon that as long as one's being shoyse mayim lahano osoi, that's considered nichlal in the din of shoyse mayim litzmoi. Perhaps we can suggest that from Rabbi Seinu Achronim, it's mavura that they perhaps had a different understanding than the Mishnah Berurah had of the Gemara. And this will explain it the following. When the Gemara is mechadish that shoyse mayim litzmoi, as the Bialachos medayik from the Rambam, that the ikar mechayiv is shoyse mayim litzmoi. Is shoyse mayim litzmoi a simple hano of achila, like if one's oichel a dover that has a tam motzei, it's hano as hano asachich. So the hano asachich of mayim is to quench thirst. That's one way to understand. Simply mayim has its own form of hano asachich. Or is the understanding that even after the maskana of the Gemara, really there's no hanoah sachech in mayim that's equivalent to other mashkin. It isn't. Chemically, without additives, water is considered odorless and tasteless. In chemistry, the havdil, it's defined as odorless and tasteless. All the taste that we have in water is from additives, whether it's fluoride, whether it's said other things, it's all added. But be'etzem, water chemically, lahavdil, is considered odorless and tasteless. So when the Gemara is mechadish that there's a hano of litzmoi, does that hano litzmoi means, yes, mayim has an oifen of, like whenever one's oichel, one's shesem, may paris, so there's a hano asachech of the tam. So mayim has a hano asachech, which is called litzmoi, or no? The Gemara is being mechadish that mayim has an entirely different mechayiv of bracha rishayim. There is a form of hanoas haguf, quenching thirst, which is not equivalent to the nenin from other oichlim, because mine doesn't have a dam. What we're going to suggest is that it's mavur from the Rishonim that the mechayiv of bracha by mayim is not because mayim has a hanoas haguf equivalent to other oichlim. It's not that simply mayim is like any other mashke, just it has a narrower range of timing that the cheich is nana from, and that the Gemara calls sheisel litzmoi. That's not what it means. It means mayim has unique mechayiv that tzmoi is one of the zrochim of the guf, and the mele b'mokum that tzorech haguf is satisfied. That's mechayiv bracha, but it's a different din than stam hanoas hachech, of any other oichel. This is what we're going to suggest is mavur from the Rishonim, that sheisem mayim litzmoi is not simply a narrower hanoas hachech. Everything else has hanoas hatam, and therefore even if you don't drink it, you drink it lechanakte onza. Soif kosev there's hanoas hatam. That's not the din by mayim. What's nischadish by mayim is there's something called a tzorech haguf, and that tzorech haguf is tzimoim, but it's not being satisfied like ordinary oichlim. Mayim is its own din. That when one is shoysim mayim litzmoi, that's not merely a narrower instance of hanoas hachech. It's the fulfillment of a tzorech haguf, which is called thirst.
And oichel doesn't have that.
Oichel,
a regular food.
Oichel avad is masbia, but the oichlin have something where there's something directly called chechnene. In the case of mayim isn't simply that tzmoin is an oifen of hanoas hachech. Mayim is because we filled one of the tzorchei haguf, which is called the guf not being tzomeh. That's the reason why Poshut in Reb Tarfon that the din of bracha shalafonov by mayim should be bar nefashos rabbis v'chesroinam. Why not shakol? Why is it different than cholov of the Mishnah? Why is it different than shar mashkim? The answer is because it's not that Reb Tarfon is arguing on the mitzias that when a person doesn't drinks a timoin is not being nene. Avad is being nene. But the hano is not a hano asachech like the tam of other dvarim. It's fulfilling a chisaron b'nefesh, which is called timoin. On that, the Tanakama is choylek, and the Tanakama says, "Ein nochenami, it's not doime to shar mashkim, where the ikar hano is tam." But because soif tzimoyin is also a hanoah saguf, we don't have to make it different from other mashkim, and the ikar bracha is not going to be bar nefashos rabbis v'chesrein. Memele zok the birkei Yosef, even though the hachra of Amodebar is to make a bracha of shahakol before, but B'Yesoidoi Tanakama isn't arguing with Reb Tarfon that the bracha of mayim is not a generalized bracha of birchas hanenin, but a specific bracha for fulfilling a tzorech haguf, which is called thirst, which is called simoin. Memele b'di'eved avada Tanakama is also moide that if you make a bar nefashos rabbis, you'll be yotzeh, because B'Yesoidoi the shahakoil doesn't make mayim in a case of tzimoin, like shar mashkim, or like cholov, or like beitzim, or like yerek, or like basar. It doesn't. Even Tanakama's moide, that b'mokum that one's being shoyse mayim tzimoi, it's not just the specific instance of where one gets hanas achayich in mayim, so it makes mayim equivalent to mei peres cholov. It's a different mechayiv bracha. It's a mechayiv bracha for tzarchei aguf. Memela, we now understand why the fear of tarfin. The same shvach can be made lefonov and laachrov. Because Yosef said, where do we find that we should make the same bracha twice? If by mistake he made a burn of Fosh's rabbis before, why should he make it afterwards? Zot the Maramonachai, have a Rashba. The Rashba says in Reparfin you do that. What's the svar in the Rashba? Why should you make the same birchas hanen, the same shvach twice? The answer is because the mechayev of mayim is b'chal not a mechayev of birchas hanen. It's a mechayev for the guf having its mili tzorech. Therefore, Koydem Lochein was speaking about the fact that there's mayim to mamal tzorech haguf, and afterwards it's a shvach for the tzorech haguf being the smale. In the case of birchas hanen, if you really being meshabeach the time of the oichel, like we would be doing in birchas hanenim, when you're saying a shvach for the same thing twice. It's like making a bar priya twice. The seder of the bracha of mayim is a different seder entirely, because the metzias of mayim is that mayim never has a standard hanoas achech. The purpose of mayim is to be mamale the tzorech haguf. I'm sorry. What? No, because that's because it's not the ma'aseh shtir b'chlal. About the chachomim masakin that so it has to be on a ma'aseh shtir. That's because that's the conditions of a ma'aseh shtir. So it's an interesting thing that's what Rosh Shlomo mentioned before by achila. If there's Sugyas na'ayim without a ma'aseh achila, why don't we say the gufa kaponim is tzaveh? So maybe I should have a kaponim shahakol for the Sugyas.
On a peg.
The answer is because Seiko said chachomim masakin only through a ma'aseh achila or a ma'aseh shtir. So what we've been mechadish,
You do it in an Ivrim Kippur.
what we've been mechadish is the following. We began with the basic suffix of the Bir Halacha is l'tzimo in specific, or does it mean any oifen of what the Bir Halacha, what the Bir Halacha calls hanoas achech? The Bir Halacha says it's any oifen of nen. We went on then to ask, what is the point of the hanoah for mayim? Is it just finding instances where mayim is the same as mei peres? Or do we need to find instances specifically where mayim is fulfilling a tzorech haguf? What we're suggesting is that it's muvur from the Birkei Yosef and the Mama Mordechai, and be'etzem that's muvur from Reparfin possibly himself, and it's muvur from the Rashba that there could be a burn of fashas lefonov and laachrov. That mayim has a different din. Mayim is not just an example of mei peres where the hanoah is specifically limited to a case of sheisa mayim l'tzmoi. Mayim is for a milui of a chisaron haguf. That's why Baron of Fosh's rabbis is the bracha that's relevant. And Memela, we now understand the chiddush pele of the Birkei Yosef that mayim has a seder of brachas, not a bracha shalafonov because osalahan is blay bracha, and a bracha shala'achrov because la'achrov one has to be mavarech. The bracha on mayim is a bracha for fulfilling a tzorech haguf. Zot the Birkei Yosef. That's mechayev a different sequence of brachas. It's mechayev a different seder of brachas. It's a bracha for the fulfillment of a tzorech haguf. It's not a bracha. It's not the din of asalahan is ba'elam hazeh b'lei bracha, and it's not the standard din of bracha la'achrov. The Yesod Advarim is that Shtiyas Mayim is Mamale et Tzorech Haguf, which is called Tzimoi.
But Lamais, we don't pass no tarfin, pass like Rabbanan. So how can you bring rise from
The
tarfin?
answer is so let's just elaborate on a point we mentioned with Advarim before. The chiddush of the Birkei Yosef is that the Chacham never argue on tarfin, loy bezenechleku. And here we come to the crux of the sugya. The machloikis Tanakam of tarfin is mayim equivalent to other birchas hanenin, or is it a bracha on burn nefashos rabbis u'chesronim? Even chachomim amoide that it's a bracha for films u'chesron. Just they hold that since soif it's alidei ma'aseh shtir, and there is a hanoah from the shviras hatzimoin in loshen shen memela the bracha shakol. That's a narrow machloikis. But la'olam zot the Birkei Yosef, the Tanakama never disputed that basic assertion about mayim that the bracha of mayim is followed from other birchas hanenin. This is the hatzol which we'll make in this sugi. Let's just end with this. The Bir Halacha brought a raya that lishois mayim shebemeyav. The Rishonim say is also considered a mechayev of bracha and is considered litzmoi. That's just another example of nene. The answer is, if one is ma'ayin carefully in the Lashonis of the Rashba, time doesn't allow us to be medayik Lashonis Rashba together. One's ma'ayin the Lashonis of the Rashba, we see that the Rashba doesn't simply say that because he's nene, it's like litzmoi. He says, since the achila has required shriya b'meyav, shriya b'meyav is also a tzoyrech like tzima'oin. But oifen that we could suggest in Shitas HaRashba that the reason why lishrois mayim shebemeyav is mechayev b'bracha is not because the cheich is being nena, because he feels better, because it's shori b'meyav. The yesod advarim is that shrias mayim b'meyav after achila is also a tzoyrech haguf, and since it's a tzoyrech haguf, boyer nefashos rabbis applies to that also. Be'oifen that we now can say the following, and this is the key point which Be'ez Hashem we want to be matzia to the lomdim in this sugya. We began with a bir alocha that if you can simply generate an oifen in which one is nene from the mayim, so then we've satisfied the condition of litzmon. Zok the butchotcher, if you add tam, if you add reach, as long as there's some hanor from the ingestion of this mayim, so then we've made the equivalent litzmon. Zok the goin, if you mix tea into water, loy meboy, that we don't have tam ki'ikir, but we have to cheshbon, that the hanor is only going to be considered it's not going to be doimer to shar mashkin. Lidvarenu, the svara of the butchotcher would seem so poshut initially, so good, is now not poshut possibly at all. If we find as a zaitige reason, we find a tangential reason why one derives hanor from the mayim, that doesn't necessarily make it into shar mashkin. When the Gemara says that shoyse mayim litzmoi, which HaRav defines as hanor, has to be the hanor for which mayim is specifically designated, which is the fulfillment of the tzorech haguf, which is called tzimoy. Otherwise, mayim doesn't function in any other way like shar mashkin. Now we have another shaila that when we add flavor, do we have tam ki'ikr? So it was transformed to whatever its tam is. That's another shaila in the goyim. But this etzem din of the butchotcher, that as long as one's nene from the mayim in some way, we've then made it the equivalent of Sheisa Mayim Litzmoi, and that's based on the Lashonis of the Mishnah Berurah says that because there's hanor, so in Mela we've satisfied the condition of Litzmoi. There's a Mokum Rochav to be done in that Shaila. Litzmoi is the milui of a Tzorech Haguf. It's Boyer Nefashos Rabbis b'Chesroinon. But stam, if we work out a Chetimtza that we could be nena from Mayim tangentially, does that change the essence of the Mayim? Possibly not. Let's finish with this nafkimina, Ledina, which will be very negeh Be'ez Hashem. Unless it shouldn't be, but we very negeh Erev Tisha B'Av. Drinking water in order not to get thirsty afterwards. What's called hydration. What's that? Now here we have a nafkimina faket. According to the Mishnah Berurah, it's not nena. It's literally filling the guf with mayim.
How you go through your chayt?
I'm not being nena. It's either litzmoi or lishras hamayim shebeneov or tam, or some other form of hanor. But if there's no hanor asachich, is that the Mishnah Berurah? No hanor. The butchotcher in the end of the Eshel Avram suggests, based on a lashon of the Gemara later, that being shoyse mayim in advance is also called shoyse mayim litzimoin. How do you understand that? There's no hanor. Elamai. There's a tzorech haguf to remain hydrated. The guf requires mayim. If the mayim is ingested to give the guf its tzorech, then that's also considered Sheisa Mayim Litzmoi. And the butchotcher is mitzadeh that Sheisa Mayim in advance of Tzimoin is also considered Sheisa Mayim. So here we have an Afkamina Fakert. On the one hand, we began with the Mishnah Berurah and the Bir Alocha, that as long as there's Samano Asachech, we've satisfied the condition of Litzimoin. And therefore, if in any way the Mayim is enhanced, then we had a Shaila that should already make a Shahakal, and we discussed that the Gra L'chor of mixing tea into the mayim, the Gemara doesn't seem to assume that Pshitas. So there we said that the Mishnah Berurah and the Bir Alocha are considerably widening the parameter of Sheisa Mayim Litzmoi, and therefore many more things would be included in the Shahakal of mayim. So now we're suggesting here's an Afkamina Fakir. It's a milui of a tzorech haguf which doesn't have hanor asachech. Drinking in advance, hydration. What we're being matzia, api the Rashba, api the Birkei Yosef, api possibly Shitas or Parafin himself, that would be considered the milui of a tzorech haguf. And that's what Mayim is for. Shoyse Mayim Letzmoy is not an example of just merely Hanoas Achich. It's an oifen fulfilling a requirement of the guf. That Avada is fulfilling the equivalent of a guf. That will be equivalent of Lishris Mayim Shebemeir if you don't understand the Rashba al Derech Mishnah Berurah. And that Shluchar should again be shortly lehepech in this machlokes. So it's to bear in mind the dina that when one drinks water erev the tzayim, this is a chance for the, if it's not after chatzos and limud b'iyun is already oser, but it's a chance for the olam to review halacha l'naitze this sugya of sheis hamayim l'tzmoy. What's the din b'negea? A very, very practical question. What's the din of being sheis hamayim today to ensure that later on?
If it's during the Sudam of seconds for you bench, the chayyur there's no, it's the mind b'techel student. That's clear.
Yeah.
So you're benching, and now you want to do that with the people drink water right
People
before.
drink the water through the day, through the afternoon, in order to kasei.
Oh, the whole afternoon, you
Yeah,
mean?
the whole afternoon. The eitzah is Rabbi Yisai, is to drink flavored water, and then we can add the tzad of the buchacha, that if there's significant flavor, it doesn't have a shame of mayim. If there's less than shishim, it has a din of tam ke'ikr, to be considered like maya de shalke, in which case we have additional tzadim to be able to move.
What's about seltzer? What about seltzer?
The gabi din of shem, the gabi din. So there we can again add the tzad of the buchacha, that since it changed the shame, so maybe it's a different chefza. But nechanami, the fee what we've been matzia al pi the Birkei Yosef udimei, we have to remember that soif kol soif, the lashon of the Mishnah Berurah is consistently Hanoas Achich. So mele ledina l'chayra, we can certainly be saying on the buchachas study. What we've mentioned is in order to be miyashiv etzem shitas of parfum, that you can make a burn of fashas before, the sheet of the Rashba that the shvach can be set twice. And the Chiddush Nifla of the Birkei Yosef that the bracha of Mayim is equivalent to Birchas HaTorah, that Mayim has a Seder Brachos, not a standard case of bracha lefanov and bracha la'achrav, and the nidin of the buchacha and the gra, but negeit if we generate tangential hanois from Mayim, how we judge that benegeit to hano. Just to finish briefly with Divrei Haggadah. Apologize, we went over time. Mayim Rabbim Leichu Chabos Sa'ab.
It doesn't matter. We have to.
It's the Sugyas Nifla of Mayim. Just in
Mayim Torah.
Parshas Masei begins with the delineation of the Masois of Klal Yisrael, and the Kadmonim already ask, what is the limud that we're supposed to understand from the fact that the Torah is marich in the purity of the Masois? It's very familiar. What's discussed in a number of Kadmonim that there is a losh of the Mitzrayim. It's muskar in the parasha of Melech. The Melech has an issa to Yimar Basusim. Pen, he'll bring the back, and there's an issa of Yeshiva b'Mitzrayim, which the Rambam is moine in Hilchos Malachim. There's an issa to be dor in Mitzrayim. So a number of Kadmonim Ma'isik that we see that there were Kehilas, and the Rambam himself lived in Mitzrayim. So one mahalach is to say the issa is not to be shov Mitzrayim or in the derech that Klal Yisrael came out of Mitzrayim. So maybe it's only if one returns to Mitzrayim in the sequence of the Masois that has an issa. If one returns in a different derech, then one is done. This is not directly our noise, but the Shailas discuss fascinatingly in the Kadmonim. When you get to the issa lefishit zeramam to be dor be'eretz Mitzrayim, what are the parameters of that issa? There's a famous Tshuvas Rambam, which is quoted by a number of Kadmonim that the Rambam once signed off. It's Hador Bechet B'Kol Yoim V'Yoim Moshe B'Naimin, and that's understood to mean that it calls man that he lived in Mitzrayim. He felt it was Be'isa. It's come more stodim in this shayla. So that's just to indicate that the etzem noise is discussed both in the Kadmonim and discussed from a halacha standpoint. We'll mention a davar nifla that's mavur in the Sasemes in Parshas Masei in Siman Tov Reish involved. Just kedai to briefly see the lashon of the Sasemes. V'nichtavu kol hamasois. So all the masois were written lohidia la'am Hashem, in order to inform Klal Yisrael l'deiros. Ki kol oived Hashem lo yipol liboy olav mikol hanefilos sheyesh lo.
Ramban Rov's code.
This is a lashon of the Sasemes and Tov Reish involved. Hibra Masfil v'nichtavu kol hamasois. Ki kachi hamida liyos oile v'yared. The midah is that a person is oile, and then a person encounters another challenge. And that challenge requires additional struggle. Because he says, we see that in many of the masois, Once they achieved menucha, when they moved again, they encountered further milchama. V'chein la'olam. Memele, he says, that's why the Torah Keseder repeats the Lashon, Vayisu, Vayachnu, Vayisu, Vayachnu. Why does every one of the Masois have to have its own Vayisu, Vayachnu? Just say, Vayisu, Vayisu, Mitzrayim, and Vayachnu, Vayisu, in all these Makaimas, and Torah just list them. Every single one of the Makaimas has its own Vayisu, Vayachnu. Zok the Sasemes, the reason for that is because every Chanoya represented an accomplishment in Avodas Hashem. And then afterwards there's a Vayisu. And there's another struggle. Each place wasn't just the constant Aliyah. It was Aliyah and then struggle. Aliyah and struggle. Aliyah and struggle. He says that's represented by the Milchamas of Klal Yisrael. That even after they achieved Chanoya, that didn't remain. They had to travel again and encounter further Milcham. And for that, the Sasemes adds something Mosik. He says, in the pasuk in Tehillim is Yelchu mechoyel el choyel, which the Gemara as a Joshua, the Gemara says that in the Gemara in Brachos that tzadikim ein menucha ba'olam hazeh. Gemara daf samach daled shenemar Yelchu mechoyel el choyel. Now, ordinarily, understand choyel means from the lashon of strength, but the Sasemes is medayik that the lashon of chayil is a lashon associated with milchama. Gibor chayil. Chayil is a lashon of strength in the case of battle. Why is the lashon for the aliyah of the tzadikim she'ein lehem menucha in terms of chayil? The answer is because Avodas Hashem is called a milchama. Milchama means you win one battle and then there's another. You win another battle and then there's another. The sheirish of the Masois, Zok the Sasemes, was to establish the pattern of the Avodas Hashem for all of Klal Yisrael days. He says, the person was created to be loichem milchama. The lashon of the Mesilas Yesharim in the beginning of the Sefer, nimtzo shehamilchama milefonim umila'acha. A person's path in life is to be engaged in constant milchama. This is the Sasemes to Nifloim, is the matara of the Torah being mefaret the Masois. He says, Sha'al zeh nivru lilchay milchemes Hashem. The person was brought by Alma in order that a person's life should be a sequence of milchamas. Vayisu, vayachnu, vayisu, vayachnu, to each one of the Masois. We can add to this what's mavur in the Maral, in the beginning of Nesivat Staka, where the Maral describes a person, an Oved Hashem, as a shliach. And he says, V'hashliach hu ha'adam, v'hameshaleach hu ha'kadosh baruch hu, asher sholach ha'adam u'barach ha'adam ba'ilomei le'omo, u'kedichsiv adam la'omal yulad. Omal means constant strain. Omal is the hepech of menucha. There are periods of menucha, but the ikar matar of the Adam is the vayisu, the hepech of Omal. Adam la'omal yulad. And the Makar Advarim is mefurish in Rabbeinu Yoino, in Sharbez, where Rabbeinu Yoino in Sharbez says the following. He says, Mishechononu Hashem yizbarach deya. If a person is zeicha to insight, Yoshev el liboi ki Hashem yizbarach sholchoi ba'olam hazeh. Lishmor mishmartoi v'seirosoi v'chukoisov u'mitzvoisov v'lo yifkach einov zulosi la'aseh shlichus. Person's focus is, and a perspective that a person has on his existence, is an unwavering attention to that shlichus. Because if the attention to the shlichus wavers, then we lose our understanding, according to the Sasemes, of why events happen to us. The reason why we face a sequence of vayisu vayachnu, of la'achar she'esigu menucha la'achar milchama, nosu la'oid milchama, v'chulei v'chulei, is only because that's part of the stream, that's part of the path called shlichus, called omo. If we lose that focus, then events in our chayim become inexplicable. Then we lose the understanding and the insight of what vayisu vayachnu is. He says, "Uleketz hayomim im asa shlichusei be'emuna zat Rabbeinu Yoino yoshuv u'bo berina B'simchas oilam al roishoi ke'eved as a sholch la'melech le'eder hayom. A melech, like a shliach who the melech has sent across the ocean. She'ein einov v'libo izulosi al dvar shlichusei ad shuvei al adoinov. V'chein omar shloim ha'melech olav ha'sholem liyois b'Hashem miftachacha lo hidia koishet imrei emes lahoshev amorim emes l'sholchech. The mashal of Rabbeinu Iyunim is if the melech, if the eved is going through the yam is sometimes stormy, sometimes calm, sometimes off course, sometimes on course. But the point is traveling to the destination. And every one of the travails that happen while a person is al hayom, the eved explains to himself that I'm engaged in this because there's an ultimate shlichus. If we lose sight of the shlichus, then we lose sight of what la'adam la'amal yulad. Then we lose sight of what the amal is for. Where do we get Zot Sasemes? Where's the shirish of that perspective on the ma'irois of someone's life, of aliyah and yerida, menucha and milchama, that's repeated again and again in Vayisu Vayachnu. Every person in his chayim goes through what the path that Klal Yisrael forged l'deiros. Like he says, the concept of yelchu mechoyel el choyel is because our chayim is a sequence of milchama and menucha, milchama and menucha. Einu amida liyos oyer yered nichtibu kol hamasois leidia la'am Hashem ki kol oyved Hashem le'yipol al liboy olav mikol hanefila sheyesh lo. And this is a very important point which the Leshem Shloi V'Achlama emphasizes in his drushim. Is that very often, especially in the Yimei Bein HaMetzarim, where we take a historical perspective on Divrei Yimei Yisrael, so we're almost miyush in terms of the fact that it looks like the Bria, not just is it not fulfilling its tachlis, but HaRav seemed almost to be going to the tzad ha'hepech, where the Bria is a constant sequence of Yeridas HaDeiros, a constant sequence Chas v'Shalom of Ribi HaRav, a constant sequence of the Ribi of Richuk Mimenu Yisbarach. What perspective do we have on that? Zog the Leshem, the perspective is because Adarabah. The Rebbeinu Shalom is creating an ever-intense sequence of milchamos, which with Klalum Prat we have to go through. Because Labasoif, it's that sequence of milchamos which will bring the shleimus of the Bria, and every one of those milchamos will be contributing in some way to the final tikkun. This is how it has to be our perspective, because collectively, sometimes in the Yimei Bein HaMetzarim Adarabah, we have a nefila yipol olav olav mikol nefila sheyesh lo, but for Klalum Prat, it seems like almost Chas v'Shalom, the Seder of Haga is the hepech. That's that tachu amida liyas oile v'yerid. All those milchamas are part of the tachlis of what the Rebbeinu Shalom was shaleach the person to the Bria to do, was Adam la'omal yuel the hashiv shalchav davar. In the Tkufa of Yimei Bein HaMetzarim, we always combine with Avelos and the Churban Tzpiyah of Yeshua. The Bal Yipol Liboy Olav, that Labasayv Zot the Leshem, all the Milchamis, all the Aliyas and the Ridas, were part of the Mechuvan of the Rebbeinu Shalom, for the Tachlis Hatikun, in a way that only the Tzur and Pali understands, and that Be'ezer Hashem, Tachu Amidali is Oil of Yered, Labasayv Yelf and Mechel of Her, the Bias Gal Tzedek.